The humid Louisiana air clung to Elijah's skin as he moved silently through the cotton fields of Willow Creek Plantation. July 1855 brought suffocating heat that made even breathing feel like work. At 43, Elijah's hands were calloused beyond recognition, his dark skin weathered from decades under the merciless southern sun. The overseer had finally retreated to the shade, giving the slaves a moment of relative peace. "Mama Hester says Miss Eleanor acting strange again," whispered Sarah, appearing beside him with a basket of cotton. At 19, Sarah had known nothing but the plantation, born into bondage just like her parents before her. "Says she been muttering to herself all morning, pacing that big house like something chasing her." Elijah nodded but kept picking. Speaking too freely could mean the lash, and he'd endured enough scars across his back to last several lifetimes. "Miss Eleanor always been peculiar since the old master died," he replied softly. "Best we keep our eyes down and minds on the cotton." The Willow Creek Plantation sat like a gleaming white jewel amidst the sprawling Louisiana bayou, its grand columns and manicured gardens masking the suffering that sustained its splendor. The plantation belonged to the Beaumont family for 3 generations, currently under the control of Eleanor Beaumont, a widow of 48 whose husband Thaddeus had died under mysterious circumstances 3 winters prior. What many didn't know was that Eleanor's relationship with Thaddeus had been far from the idyllic southern marriage portrayed to neighbors and business associates. Behind closed doors, Thaddeus had been cruel and calculating, treating Eleanor with the same cold indifference he showed the slaves who worked his land. Their only daughter, Margaret, had fled north at 16, unable to bear her father's temperament and heartbroken by her mother's silent complicity. The dinner bell rang across the plantation, signaling the end of the workday. Elijah and the others slowly made their way back toward the slave quarters, their bodies aching from 14 hours in the fields. As they approached the small cluster of rough-hewn cabins, Mama Hester, the elderly cook who had served in the Beaumont house for over 50 years, rushed toward them, her eyes wide with distress. "Something ain't right in that house," she whispered urgently, pulling Elijah aside. "Miss Eleanor had me prepare a special stew this morning, said it was for the new field hands, but then she took it upstairs herself. I heard crying up there, Elijah, sounded like children." Elijah felt a chill despite the evening heat. "What children?" "There ain't been children in that house since Miss Margaret ran away years ago." "That's just it," Hester continued, her voice trembling. "Yesterday, I could have sworn I saw Miss Margaret through the kitchen window, walking the grounds with 2 little ones. But that can't be right. She ain't been back here since she left." Sarah, who had been listening nearby, stepped closer. "I saw them too," she admitted quietly. "A woman who looked like an older Miss Margaret with 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were by the old oak near the cemetery plot, but they disappeared when the overseer rode past." The slave quarters buzzed with nervous energy that night. Strange happenings at Willow Creek weren't uncommon. Slaves often reported eerie sounds from the bayou or mysterious lights in the cemetery where generations of Beaumonts rested. But children at the big house was something different altogether. Inside the mansion, Eleanor Beaumont sat alone in her dining room, a glass of sherry trembling in her hand as she stared at an empty chair across the table. "They've come back, Thaddeus," she whispered to the vacant seat. "Margaret's brought them home to punish us, to punish me for what we did." The next morning, Elijah was assigned to work in the gardens near the main house, a rare respite from the fields. As he trimmed the hedges beneath the library window, he heard Eleanor's voice drifting out. She appeared to be entertaining guests, though no carriages had arrived at Willow Creek. "Of course they can stay, Margaret," Eleanor's voice carried clearly. "They're my grandchildren, after all. Blood of my blood. We have so much to catch up on." Elijah froze, the shears motionless in his hands. He glanced toward the window, seeing only Eleanor's reflection as she moved about the room, seemingly pouring tea for invisible companions. Later that afternoon, Sarah was sent to clean the upstairs bedrooms. In the east wing, she found a room that had been recently prepared. Fresh linens on the beds, toys arranged on a small table, and a porcelain doll placed carefully on the pillow. As she dusted the mantelpiece, she noticed fresh, childlike handprints in the dust of the windowsill, too small to belong to an adult. That evening, as darkness settled over the plantation, Eleanor summoned Mama Hester to the kitchen. "I need you to prepare a special meal tomorrow," she instructed, her grey eyes unnaturally bright. "My grandchildren have particular tastes. They require something substantial, something that will keep their spirits strong." "Yes, Miss Eleanor," Hester replied cautiously. "What would you like me to prepare?" Eleanor smiled, a strange expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll handle the main course myself. I just need you to prepare the vegetables and a sweet dessert. The children love sweets." As Hester left the kitchen, she passed the cellar door and noticed it was ajar, a faint whimpering sound emanating from below. She paused, her heart racing, but the sudden appearance of the overseer sent her scurrying back to the slave quarters. The following day brought heavy rain, thunder rolling across the bayou, as lightning illuminated the grand house in sudden, stark flashes. Elijah worked in the stables, the animals unusually agitated as the storm intensified. When he went to fetch more hay from the storage barn, he discovered a small handprint in blood on the inside of the door. By midday, word had spread among the slaves that something was terribly wrong. Sarah reported seeing Eleanor digging in the family cemetery before dawn, her nightgown covered in mud. Others claimed to have heard children's laughter echoing from the empty third floor of the mansion, a space unused since before the Civil War. As evening approached, Eleanor requested Elijah bring firewood to the dining room. When he entered, he found the table set for 4 people, with Eleanor sitting at the head, speaking animatedly to the empty chairs. "You children must eat every bite," she was saying, serving invisible plates. "It will make you strong, strong enough to stay with grandmother forever." Elijah quietly stacked the wood by the fireplace, trying to remain unnoticed. As he turned to leave, Eleanor suddenly addressed him. "Elijah, wouldn't you agree that family must always stay together? That the bonds of blood are sacred?" "Yes, Miss Eleanor," he replied cautiously, his eyes fixed on the floor. "My daughter tried to break those bonds," Eleanor continued, her voice hardening. "She took what was mine away from me. But they've returned now, haven't they? And they'll never leave again." That night, as the storm reached its peak, screams erupted from the main house. Not the cries of children, but Eleanor's voice, ragged and terrified. The overseer rushed from his quarters, ordering everyone to remain in the slave cabins as he headed toward the mansion. Huddled in their small cabin, Elijah, Sarah, and Mama Hester listened as the screams continued, punctuated by the crashing thunder. "She's been carrying a burden," Mama Hester whispered. "Something dark happened in that house years ago. Something she and the master did." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Hester's ancient eyes reflected the lightning that flashed through the cracks in the cabin walls. "There were rumors, when Miss Margaret was young, that she had a secret, a man she loved, a freeman from New Orleans. They say she had his children, twins, before she fled north. But what would that have to do with—" Elijah began, before a tremendous crash from the direction of the main house silenced them all. The overseer didn't return that night. As dawn broke, revealing a landscape washed clean by the storm, Elijah and several others were summoned to the main house. Inside, they found destruction, furniture overturned, mirrors shattered, and a terrible smell emanating from the dining room. On the dining table sat covered silver dishes, their contents untouched, and Eleanor Beaumont was nowhere to be found. As the local sheriff was called to investigate, Sarah slipped into the family cemetery, drawn by an inexplicable urge. There, beside the grand Beaumont mausoleum, she discovered 3 fresh graves, small, shallow, and marked only with crude wooden crosses. Next to them was a 4th, newly dug hole, empty and waiting. And behind her, standing silent and solemn, was Eleanor Beaumont, her once elegant dress now filthy and torn, a shovel clutched in her trembling hands, and her eyes reflecting horrors beyond imagining. "They need to eat," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracked and inhuman. "Grandmother must feed them, keep them strong, keep them here forever." The investigation into the disturbing events at Willow Creek Plantation proceeded with the reluctant pace typical of authorities examining the affairs of wealthy white landowners in antebellum Louisiana. Sheriff Thomas Caldwell, a portly man with connections to every prominent family in the parish, seemed more concerned with maintaining Eleanor Beaumont's dignity than uncovering the truth. "Grief affects people in strange ways," he declared to his deputy after their initial visit. "Mrs. Beaumont is clearly unwell, but that's a matter for her physician, not the law." What the sheriff couldn't dismiss, however, were the 3 small graves Sarah had discovered. Under pressure from the local magistrate, Caldwell ordered them exhumed one misty August morning, while Eleanor watched from her bedroom window, her face an alabaster mask of indifference. Elijah and 2 other enslaved men were forced to dig up the crude graves, their shovels cutting into the soft earth as Mama Hester prayed quietly nearby. What they found sent ripples of horror through the entire plantation. 3 small coffins, handmade and rough, each containing not bodies but carefully arranged possessions: a child's shoe, locks of hair, torn pieces of clothing, and small toys, all preserved as if in memorial. "Peculiar, but not criminal," Sheriff Caldwell concluded, visibly relieved at not finding human remains. "The lady has suffered a breakdown, clearly mourning grandchildren she never had." But Elijah and the others weren't convinced. That night, gathered in the stifling confines of Mama Hester's cabin, they pieced together fragments of the Beaumont family history that had been whispered for years. "Miss Margaret was barely 16 when she fled," Mama Hester recalled, her arthritic fingers working cornbread dough as she spoke. "I helped her escape myself, God forgive me. She was carrying then twins, as she told me later through a message delivered by a traveling preacher." "But what happened to the children?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed despite the privacy of the cabin. Hester's hands stilled. "The message said they were born healthy in Philadelphia, a boy and a girl. She named them Frederick and Amelia." Elijah leaned forward. "And you believe they came here recently?" "I believe," Hester said carefully, "that Miss Margaret may have returned briefly with those children, now grown to about 7 or 8 years of age. And I believe something terrible happened during that visit." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. The cabin fell silent, fear rippling through its occupants. Unauthorized gatherings among slaves could result in severe punishment. Elijah cautiously opened the door to find Nathaniel, the young house servant who had recently replaced the missing overseer as Eleanor's personal attendant. "Miss Eleanor wants to see you, Mama Hester," Nathaniel whispered, his eyes darting nervously toward the big house. "She's asking for you specifically, says it's about preparing another special meal." Hester exchanged worried glances with the others before slowly rising to her feet. "Tell her I'm coming." "Be careful," Sarah urged as Hester wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. "Something's not right with that woman." The main house loomed against the night sky, most of its windows dark except for the soft glow emanating from Eleanor's study. Hester climbed the back stairs, her old bones protesting each step. She found Eleanor sitting at her desk, writing frantically in a leather-bound journal. "You wanted to see me, Miss Eleanor," Hester announced her presence softly. Eleanor looked up, her face gaunt in the lamplight. Once considered the most beautiful woman in the parish, she now appeared decades older than her years, her skin sallow and her once golden hair streaked with grey. "Ah, Hester," she said, setting down her pen. "Yes, I need your assistance. The children are hungry again." Hester swallowed hard. "Miss Eleanor, there aren't any children here." Eleanor's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Don't you lie to me. You've seen them yourself, my grandchildren, Margaret's twins. They're here in this house and they need nourishment." "Miss Margaret hasn't been back to Willow Creek in years," Hester said gently. And if she had children, they wouldn't be here without her. "Margaret is dead," Eleanor shrieked, slamming her palm against the desk. "She died trying to keep them from me." But the children returned. They know where they belong. The room fell silent except for Eleanor's ragged breathing. After a moment, she composed herself, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "I apologize for my outburst," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "You've always been loyal, Hester. That's why I'm entrusting you with a special task. I need you to help me prepare a meal that will bind my grandchildren to Willow Creek forever." "What kind of meal, Miss Eleanor?" Eleanor smiled, the expression chilling on her haggard face. "A sacrifice. Something precious freely given. In the old days, people understood such things. Blood calls to blood." Hester took an involuntary step backward. "I don't understand what you're asking of me." "You will," Eleanor replied, opening a drawer and removing a small, ornate box. "In time, you all will. Now, go to the kitchen and begin preparing the vegetables. I'll bring the main course myself." As Hester retreated from the study, she noticed something she hadn't seen upon entering, a child's drawing pinned to the wall beside Eleanor's desk. It depicted 3 stick figures standing before a large house, with a 4th figure lying on the ground, surrounded by red crayon. In the kitchen, Hester found Sarah unexpectedly preparing bread dough. "What are you doing here?" Hester whispered urgently. "You shouldn't be in the house at this hour." "Nathaniel said Miss Eleanor wanted extra bread for tomorrow," Sarah explained. "What did she want with you?" Before Hester could answer, a blood-curdling scream echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Both women froze, their eyes meeting in terror. "Stay here," Hester instructed, her voice shaking as she moved toward the servants' staircase. The upstairs hallway was dark, except for a thin line of light beneath Eleanor's bedroom door. As Hester approached, she heard Eleanor speaking in a sing-song voice. "Hush now, children. Grandmother's here. Grandmother will make everything right." Gathering her courage, Hester knocked softly. "Miss Eleanor, is everything all right?" The door creaked open a few inches, revealing Eleanor in her nightgown, her hair wild around her shoulders. Behind her, Hester could see the bedroom in disarray. Bedsheets torn, furniture toppled, and most disturbing of all, childlike handprints in what appeared to be blood on the wall above the bed. "We're having a little midnight feast," Eleanor said, her eyes fever-bright. "The children were hungry. Children are always hungry, don't you find? Growing requires sustenance." "Miss Eleanor, please," Hester began. "Let me send for the doctor. You're not well." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I've never been more well, Hester. For the first time in years, I see clearly. I understand what must be done." She glanced over her shoulder and smiled at the empty room. "Don't we, children? Grandmother understands now." The next morning, Elijah was summoned to the main house to repair a broken window. As he worked outside Eleanor's bedroom, he heard her conversing with her invisible grandchildren. "Your mother tried to keep you from your destiny," Eleanor was saying. "She didn't understand the power in our bloodline, the sacrifice required to maintain our position. But Grandmother knows." "Grandmother has always known?" Through a gap in the curtains, Elijah could see Eleanor sitting in a rocking chair, cradling something in her arms wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. She rocked gently back and forth, singing a lullaby under her breath. That afternoon, Sheriff Caldwell returned to the plantation, accompanied by a distinguished-looking gentleman introduced as Dr. Lawrence Montgomery, a specialist in diseases of the mind from New Orleans. They were greeted by Nathaniel, who led them to the parlor where Eleanor sat perfectly composed in a high-backed chair, wearing a pristine blue dress, her hair neatly arranged beneath a lace cap. "Mrs. Beaumont," Dr. Montgomery began gently, "I understand you've been experiencing some distress recently. Perhaps seeing things that others cannot see?" Eleanor regarded him coolly. "I don't know what you mean, Doctor. I've simply been enjoying the company of my grandchildren, who have come to stay with me after their poor mother's passing." "And when did Margaret die?" the doctor inquired, his tone carefully neutral. 3 weeks ago," Eleanor replied without hesitation. A tragic accident in Philadelphia. The children were sent to me, their only living relative. Sheriff Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Beaumont, we've made inquiries. Your daughter Margaret is alive and well in Boston. She has no children. Eleanor's placid expression didn't change, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles whitened. You are mistaken, Sheriff. My grandchildren are here. I've been caring for them since their arrival. Perhaps, Dr. Montgomery suggested, we might meet these children. They're resting now, Eleanor said firmly. The journey was exhausting for them. I won't have them disturbed. As the men continued their gentle interrogation, Sarah was dusting in the adjoining room, straining to hear the conversation through the partially open door. A soft tugging at her skirt made her jump. Looking down, she saw nothing, yet the tugging continued, as if small, invisible hands were trying to get her attention. Sarah, a child's voice whispered, though her eyes registered no one there. Help us! Grandmother is going to eat us all up just like she did before. Sarah bit back a scream, backing away until she bumped into a small writing desk, sending an inkwell crashing to the floor. The noise interrupted the conversation in the parlor. Who's there? Eleanor called sharply. Sarah had no choice but to enter, curtsying apologetically. Forgive me, Miss Eleanor. I was cleaning and had an accident with the ink. Eleanor's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but Dr. Montgomery interjected smoothly. Actually, I'd like to speak with some of the household staff, if you don't mind, Mrs. Beaumont. They might provide valuable insights into your recent experiences. My slaves will tell you nothing of value, Eleanor snapped, her careful composure cracking. They're liars, all of them, especially that one. She pointed accusingly at Sarah. She's been trying to turn the children against me. Sheriff Caldwell stood abruptly. I think we've seen enough, Doctor. Mrs. Beaumont is clearly unwell. I am not unwell, Eleanor shrieked, rising from her chair. I am protecting my bloodline. The children must be nourished properly if they're to survive here. As Dr. Montgomery attempted to calm her, Eleanor's gaze fixed on something visible only to her near the doorway. Her expression softened. There you are, my darlings, she cooed, extending her arms toward the empty space. Come to grandmother. These men are leaving now. Then we can have our special dinner. That evening, Dr. Montgomery and Sheriff Caldwell departed with promises to return the following day with proper papers for Eleanor's temporary removal to the doctor's sanitarium in New Orleans. As their carriage disappeared down the long drive, a strange calm settled over Willow Creek Plantation. In the slave quarters, Elijah, Sarah, and Mama Hester gathered with several others to discuss the day's events. They're taking her away tomorrow, Elijah confirmed. The doctor says her mind is broken from grief and isolation. But what about the children? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I heard them, Elijah. They spoke to me. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Finally, Mama Hester spoke, her voice carrying the weight of decades of witnessed horrors. There's something you all need to know, she said gravely. Something that happened long ago when Miss Margaret was first carrying her babies. The others leaned in as Hester continued, her words painting a picture more terrible than any had imagined. Master Thaddeus discovered Margaret's condition and flew into a rage. He locked her in the East Wing bedroom for months, telling everyone she'd been sent to finishing school. When the babies were born, he took them away. Margaret was told they'd died at birth. But they didn't die, did they? Elijah asked quietly. Hester shook her head slowly. I never saw bodies, and there was a strange feast that night, just for the master and mistress. Miss Eleanor preparing a special stew in the middle of the night, insisting on cooking it herself. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You don't mean... I can't say for certain, Hester whispered. But Margaret escaped a week later, half mad with grief, and neither the master nor mistress ever spoke of those children again. Tut! Outside the cabin, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of children's laughter from the direction of the main house. And in her bedroom, Eleanor Beaumont rocked in her chair, smiling at the small spectral figures that only she could fully see. planning the feast that would bind them to her forever, a feast the slaves of Willow Creek would be forced to prepare come morning. "Blood calls to blood," she whispered to the darkness, "and hunger never truly dies." Dawn broke over Willow Creek plantation with an unnatural stillness. No birds sang in the moss-draped oaks, and even the insects seemed to have fallen silent. The air hung heavy with moisture and foreboding as the slaves emerged from their cabins to begin another day of labor under a sky threatening rain. Elijah found himself assigned to dig a new drainage ditch near the family cemetery, a task that kept him within sight of the main house while providing some distance from whatever horrors might unfold within its walls. As he worked, he watched the mansion carefully, noting that no smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. No servants moved between the house and outbuildings. It was as though Willow Creek itself was holding its breath, waiting. By mid-morning, there was still no sign of Sheriff Caldwell or Dr. Montgomery returning with the promised papers for Eleanor's commitment. Sarah, sent to gather eggs from the henhouse, crept to the edge of the gardens where Elijah was working. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Nathaniel didn't come out to assign morning duties, and Mama Hester was summoned to the house before sunrise. No one's seen her since. Elijah leaned on his shovel, wiping sweat from his brow. "What about Miss Eleanor?" "The curtains in her bedroom are drawn tight," Sarah replied. "But there's movement inside. I saw shadows passing behind the fabric when I looked up from the yard." A distant rumble of thunder punctuated her words, and both glanced toward the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. The coming storm matched the growing sense of dread that had settled over the plantation. "We should check on Mama Hester," Elijah decided, his voice low. "Something doesn't feel right." Approaching the main house required caution. Under normal circumstances, slaves didn't enter without specific duties or permission, but these were not normal circumstances. Elijah and Sarah made their way to the back entrance, where the kitchen door stood slightly ajar, another troubling sign of disruption to the plantation's rigid routine. The kitchen was unnaturally cold despite the summer heat, the hearth dark and unlit. Pots and utensils lay scattered across the preparation table, and in the center of the floor sat a large iron cauldron, its interior stained with what appeared to be dried blood. "Mama Hester?" Sarah called softly, her voice quavering. "Are you here?" A weak groan emanated from the pantry. They found Hester huddled in the corner, her apron torn and dirty, her usually neat hair falling loose around her face. Her eyes were wide with terror. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped as Elijah helped her to her feet. "She's not right, not human anymore." "What happened?" Sarah asked, supporting Hester's other arm. "She had me preparing vegetables all night," Hester explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Said the children needed special nourishment. Then she went to the cellar and brought up... The elderly woman shuddered, unable to continue. "Brought up what?" Elijah pressed gently, Hester's eyes filled with tears. "Meat, but not from any animal I ever seen. She said it was essence of innocence. Said only that could keep the children bound to her." A crash from upstairs interrupted her explanation, followed by the sound of breaking glass and a child's wail, audible to all of them this time, not just Eleanor or Sarah. "They're getting stronger," Hester whispered. "The more she feeds them, the more real they become. And they're angry, Elijah. So angry." Footsteps on the stairs sent them retreating deeper into the pantry. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, her once elegant nightgown now filthy and torn, her grey hair hanging in lank strands around her gaunt face. In her arms, she cradled a small bundle wrapped in bloody cloth. "Hester!" she called, her voice cracked and desperate. "Where are you, you ungrateful wretch?" "The children need their meal prepared properly." From their hiding place they watched in horror as Eleanor unwrapped the bundle on the table, revealing not a child, but a grotesque doll, fashioned from what appeared to be scraps of meat and bone, crudely stitched together and dressed in children's clothing. "Look what grandmother made for you," Eleanor cooed to the empty air beside her. A new body, stronger than the last. Once you eat your special dinner, you can inhabit it permanently. No more flickering in and out. You'll be real again. She moved to the cauldron and stroked its rim lovingly. We'll need fresh ingredients for tonight's feast, the final feast. After tonight, you'll never leave grandmother again. When Eleanor left the kitchen, Elijah made a decision. We need to find help. The sheriff should have been here by now. What if he's not coming? Sarah asked, voicing the fear they all shared. White authorities rarely intervened to protect slaves, even from a madwoman. Then we protect ourselves, Elijah replied grimly. Gather everyone in the quarters after dusk. Tell them to bar their doors and windows. No one comes to the house tonight, no matter who calls for them. As they helped Mama Hester back to her cabin, the first heavy raindrops began to fall. By afternoon, a proper deluge had descended upon Willow Creek, turning the dirt roads to mud and effectively cutting off the plantation from the outside world. Any hope of the sheriff arriving with the doctor vanished as the bayou creeks rose, flooding the low-lying approaches to the property. Lightning split the darkening sky as Elijah made his rounds among the slave cabins, warning everyone to stay inside. As he returned to his own quarters, a small figure darted across his path, a child of perhaps 7 or 8, wearing old-fashioned clothes. The apparition turned to look at him, revealing a face that was almost human but not quite, with features that seemed to shift and blur in the rain. "Help us," the child thing whispered, its voice echoing as though from a great distance. "She ate us once. She'll do it again." Before Elijah could respond, the figure dissolved into the rain. Shaken, he hurried to his cabin where Sarah waited with Mama Hester and several others. "I saw one of them," he admitted as he barred the door behind him. "A boy, I think. He spoke to me." "I saw the girl earlier," Sarah added, "near the well. She was trying to show me something in the water, but Nathaniel came before I could look." Mama Hester sat rocking slowly by the small fire, her ancient eyes reflecting the flames. "Those poor children," she murmured, "consumed by their own blood. No wonder their spirits can't rest." "What are you saying, Mama?" one of the younger women asked. Hester's rocking stilled. "I'm saying Miss Eleanor and Master Thaddeus did something unnatural when those babies were born, something evil. They consumed their own grandchildren to maintain their power over this land and everyone on it. Blood sacrifice. Old magic from across the ocean." A collective shudder ran through the small gathering. Such practices were whispered about among the slaves. Dark rituals brought from Africa and the Caribbean, but perverted by white masters for their own purposes. But if the children were consumed, Sarah said carefully, how can they be here now? How can Miss Eleanor believe they've returned? "Spirits don't follow natural laws," Hester replied, "especially those who died by violence or betrayal. They've been trying to come home for years, gaining strength. And now, with Master Thaddeus gone and Miss Eleanor's mind broken, they've found a way in." The storm reached its peak as night fell, transforming Willow Creek into an island amid the flooded Louisiana countryside. From the main house, lights blazed from every window despite the late hour, creating an eerie glow through the curtain of rain. Occasionally shadows could be seen moving inside, some the size of adults, others unmistakably child-sized. Near midnight, a pounding at the cabin door startled the occupants from their uneasy vigil. Elijah motioned for silence as he approached cautiously. "Who's there?" he called through the wooden planks. "It's Nathaniel! Let me in, for God's sake!" Elijah cracked the door to find the house servant drenched and trembling, his eyes wide with panic. "She's gone completely mad," Nathaniel gasped as he stumbled inside. "She's preparing a feast with... He broke down, unable to complete the sentence. "With what?" Elijah demanded, gripping the young man's shoulders. "With parts," Nathaniel finally managed. "Human parts. She sent me to fetch all of you for the serving. Said the children want to watch everyone partake of their essence before they take their new forms." Horror descended upon the cabin like a physical weight. Outside, the storm seemed to respond to their fear, wind howling around the small structure and rain pounding on the roof with renewed fury. "We're not going," Elijah declared firmly. "She can't force us all." "She said if you don't come willingly, she'll burn the quarters," Nathaniel whispered. "With everyone inside, she's got oil lamps ready, and she'll do it, Elijah." The look in her eyes, she's not human anymore. The impossible choice hung in the air between them. Then Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised in determination. "We need to end this," she said. "Not just for ourselves, but for those children. Their spirits can't rest while she continues this abomination." "What are you suggesting?" Elijah asked, though he already knew. "We go to the house," Sarah replied. "All of us, but not as victims. If what Mama Hester says is true, those spirit children want justice. Maybe we can help them get it." The plan they formulated was born of desperation and centuries of suppressed rage. As slaves, they had no legal recourse, no authority to stop a white woman, no matter how deranged. But they had numbers, and they had the righteous anger of the oppressed. 20 men and women made their way through the deluge toward the blazing lights of Willow Creek Mansion. As they approached, they could hear Eleanor's voice raised in a strange sing-song chant that made their skin crawl. Words in no language they recognized, ancient and profane. They entered through the kitchen, where the large cauldron now bubbled over a roaring fire, filled with a thick reddish stew that emitted a sickeningly sweet aroma. On the preparation table lay more of the meat dolls, each dressed in children's clothing, their crude faces stitched into permanent smiles. "She's in the dining room," Nathaniel whispered, pointing toward the swinging door that separated the kitchen from the formal dining areas. "She's been setting places for everyone on the plantation." Elijah led the way, pushing through the door into a scene from a nightmare. The long dining table gleamed with silver and crystal, each place setting meticulously arranged with the finest Beaumont china. At the head of the table sat Eleanor, wearing a rotting wedding gown that might once have been her daughter's. A crown of wilted flowers perched atop her matted hair. "Ah, my faithful servants," she greeted them with a terrible smile. "Just in time for our celebration. The children are so excited to meet you all properly." She gestured to the empty chairs beside her. "Say hello to your grandmother's guests, darlings." As though responding to her command, candles flickered throughout the room, and a cold draught swept across the assembled slaves. And then, gradually, they appeared. 2 small figures seated on either side of Eleanor, their forms transparent but growing more solid by the moment. A boy and a girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes from another era, their faces bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Eleanor herself. "Tonight," Eleanor continued, seemingly oblivious to the horror on the faces of those before her, "we complete the ritual begun 16 years ago. My grandchildren will take their rightful place in this house, in new bodies fashioned by my hand. And you," she pointed at the assembled slaves, "will bind yourselves to them through the sacred meal. The essence you consume will tie you to this land forever, ensuring your loyal service for generations to come." From the kitchen, Mama Hester appeared carrying the cauldron, her ancient arms straining under its weight. Her eyes met Elijah's briefly, communicating a silent message. Behind Eleanor, the spectral children were becoming increasingly visible, their expressions transforming from blank impassivity to rage. "Bring the feast," Eleanor commanded, gesturing grandly toward the center of the table. "Let us begin the binding." As Mama Hester approached with the cauldron, Elijah stepped forward. "No," he said simply, his voice steady despite his fear. Eleanor's face contorted with fury. "You dare defy me? I own you, body and soul." "Not our souls," Sarah countered, moving to stand beside Elijah, "and not theirs either." She nodded toward the ghost children, who were now watching the confrontation with avid interest. "Foolish girl," Eleanor hissed. "Do you think they're here to save you? They're here because I called them. Because blood calls to blood." "No, grandmother," the spectral boy spoke suddenly, his voice sending chills through everyone present. "We came for justice." Eleanor's expression softened as she turned to the child. "Of course you did, darling. And grandmother will give you justice, new bodies, new life." "We don't want new bodies," the girl spirit replied, her form growing more solid with each word. "We want you to join us." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Eleanor's face. "What do you mean, precious one?" "We want you to know what it feels like," the boy continued, rising from his chair to stand beside his sister, "to be consumed by your own blood." Eleanor's eyes widened in sudden understanding and fear. She attempted to stand, but invisible forces pressed her back into her seat. Around the room, candles flared unnaturally bright as the storm outside reached a crescendo, wind howling through the house and rattling the windows in their frames. "You can't!" Eleanor gasped, struggling against unseen restraints. "I'm your grandmother." "Your blood." "Yes," the children replied in unison, their voices overlapping in an inhuman chorus. "Our blood." What happened next would be whispered about for generations on plantations throughout Louisiana. The slaves of Willow Creek witnessed something beyond natural explanation, as the spirits of the murdered children enacted their vengeance upon the grandmother who had consumed them in life. Eleanor Beaumont's final scream echoed through the mansion as her body seemed to collapse inward, withering before their eyes until nothing remained but a desiccated husk in a rotting wedding gown, her mouth frozen open in a silent howl of agony. As the assembled slaves watched in stunned silence, the spectral children turned to them, their forms beginning to fade once more. "Free now," the boy whispered. "All free," the girl added, her transparent hand reaching toward Sarah, and then they were gone, leaving only the howling storm and a house full of secrets laid bare. Outside, through the dining room windows, lightning illuminated the approach of several carriages struggling through the muddy drive. Sheriff Caldwell and Dr. Montgomery finally arriving with reinforcements, too late to witness the supernatural justice visited upon Willow Creek Plantation. Elijah made a swift decision. "Take the children's remains," he instructed, nodding toward the cauldron and the grotesque dolls. "Bury them properly in the cemetery, then return to your cabins as if nothing has happened." "What about her?" Nathaniel asked, pointing at Eleanor's corpse. "Let them find her," Sarah answered grimly. "Let them see what her evil brought upon her." As the slaves dispersed to carry out Elijah's instructions, Mama Hester lingered, her ancient eyes fixed on the withered remains of Eleanor Beaumont. "Blood calls to blood," she murmured, "but freedom calls louder still." The official account of the Beaumont tragedy, as recorded in the St. James Parish records of September 1855, made no mention of supernatural vengeance or spectral children. Instead, it detailed the sad demise of Eleanor Beaumont, a grieving widow whose mental faculties had deteriorated following her husband's death, culminating in her apparent suicide during a violent storm. Sheriff Caldwell's report noted the peculiar condition of Mrs. Beaumont's remains, but attributed it to natural decomposition accelerated by the humid conditions. Dr. Montgomery, more experienced in unusual deaths, privately harbored doubts, but kept them to himself, understanding that some truths were better left undocumented in a society built upon carefully maintained illusions. What the official records did not capture, could not capture, were the changes that swept through Willow Creek Plantation in the aftermath of that terrible night. With no living Beaumont heirs, the estate passed into the hands of Thaddeus Beaumont's younger brother Cornelius, a northern businessman with progressive ideas and mounting debts. 1 month after Eleanor's death, Cornelius arrived at Willow Creek with his wife and 2 young sons. His first action upon taking possession of the property was to call the slaves to gather before the main house. "I have no interest in maintaining this plantation," he announced bluntly. "My businesses in Philadelphia require my attention, and frankly, the institution of slavery is incompatible with my conscience." A ripple of disbelief moved through the assembled men and women. Elijah, standing near the front, kept his expression carefully neutral despite the hope blooming in his chest. "I intend to sell this property," Cornelius continued, "but I will not sell human beings. Therefore, effective immediately, I am manumitting all slaves belonging to the Willow Creek estate." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Mama Hester's quiet sobbing. Freedom, the dream that had sustained generations through unimaginable hardship, had arrived unexpectedly in the wake of horror. "Those who wish may stay on as paid laborers until the property sells," Cornelius added. "All others will receive papers and a small stipend to begin their lives elsewhere." In the days that followed, Willow Creek became a place transformed. Most of the former slaves chose to remain temporarily, accepting Cornelius's offer of fair wages while they considered their futures. Sarah, who had never known any home but the plantation, found herself appointed as housekeeper for the new master's family, a position of respect unimaginable just weeks earlier. Elijah, with his natural leadership and intelligence, became Cornelius's chief advisor regarding the plantation operations. For the first time in his life, white men addressed him by name and listened to his opinions with genuine interest. Only Mama Hester declined the opportunity to stay. "This land has seen too much suffering," she explained when Elijah questioned her decision. "Those children found their peace, but others haven't. I've served the Beaumonts for 68 years. It's time for me to live for myself, what little time I have left." With her freedom papers and stipend, Hester departed for New Orleans, where her youngest granddaughter had been sold years earlier. The knowledge that she might reunite with her own blood before death claimed her gave the ancient woman a vigor that years of servitude had suppressed. October brought cooler temperatures and a steady stream of potential buyers for Willow Creek. None showed serious interest, however, once they learned that purchasing the plantation would not include its former enslaved workforce. The property's value, like that of most southern plantations, had been calculated largely on the basis of human chattel. "Let them walk away," Cornelius remarked to Elijah after yet another disappointed buyer departed. "I'd rather sell at a loss than perpetuate this system." As autumn deepened, rumors began circulating about Willow Creek. Strange sounds at night, unexplained footprints in the family cemetery, objects moving without human intervention. The mansion that had once been the pride of the parish was developing a reputation as haunted. Sarah, working in the main house daily, witnessed phenomena that defied explanation, doors opening and closing without human touch, children's laughter echoing in empty rooms, and occasionally glimpses of two small figures watching from shadowed corners, their presence not malevolent but vigilant, as though guarding against the return of past horrors. "They're still here," she confided to Elijah one evening as they walked the grounds. "Frederick and Amelia, not angry anymore, but waiting." "Waiting for what?" Elijah asked, glancing toward the mansion's illuminated windows. Sarah shook her head. "I'm not sure, but they seem most active when potential buyers visit, especially those asking about restoring the plantation to its former glory." Cornelius Beaumont, a man of rationality and business, initially dismissed reports of supernatural occurrences. That changed in late October, when his wife and sons departed suddenly for Philadelphia, following what Mrs. Beaumont would only describe as an inexplicable encounter that left her unwilling to spend another night under the Willow Creek roof. Left alone in the increasingly eerie mansion, Cornelius found himself drawn to the family records stored in Thaddeus's study. Night after night, he pored over ledgers and journals by lamplight, piecing together the dark history of the wealth he had inherited. On a particularly cold November evening, he summoned Elijah to the study. The room was littered with open books and scattered papers, and Cornelius himself looked haggard, as though he hadn't slept in days. "I've found something," he said without preamble, indicating a leather-bound journal on the desk. "My brother's private accounts from 1839. The year my niece Margaret apparently became pregnant." Elijah maintained a respectful silence. Though his heart quickened, the study felt unnaturally cold, despite the fire crackling in the hearth. There are entries here about securing the bloodline and ancient rituals of consumption, Cornelius continued, his voice strained. References to practices I can scarcely believe were conducted by my own family. And this, he pushed forward a small book with a faded red cover, Eleanor's personal diary, the things she describes, the things they did to those children. We know what happened, sir, Elijah said quietly. We've always known. Cornelius looked up sharply. You've seen them, haven't you? The children. My staff in Philadelphia thought my wife was hysterical when she wrote about ghostly children following her through the house, but you've seen them too. Elijah hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, sir. They've been here since Miss Eleanor died, before that even, but weaker, less visible. God help us, Cornelius muttered, passing a trembling hand over his face. What am I to do with this place? I can't in good conscience sell it to another planter. Not knowing what I know now, not just about the children, but about how this fortune was built, on suffering more terrible than I had imagined. The study door creaked open slowly, though no human hand touched it. Both men fell silent as a cold draught circled the room, extinguishing the candles on Cornelius's desk one by one. Only the fireplace continued to provide light, casting long shadows across the paper-strewn floor. In one of those shadows, a small figure gradually took shape, the boy, Frederick, his form more substantial than Elijah had seen before. Beside him, his sister materialized, her spectral hand clasped tightly in her brother's. Cornelius went rigid with shock, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the desk. "Dear God," he whispered, "they're real." "Oh, free us," the children said in unison, their voices overlapping in that same unnatural chorus Elijah remembered from the night of Eleanor's death. "Free all of us." "What do you want from me?" Cornelius asked, his voice barely audible. The spectral girl pointed toward the windows, beyond which lay the expanse of Willow Creek Plantation, the fields, the outbuildings, and most significantly, the slave quarters where generations had lived and died in bondage. "Burn it," Frederick said simply. "Cleanse it with fire. Unmake what they made with blood," Amelia added, her transparent face solemn. Before Cornelius could respond, the apparitions faded, leaving only the lingering chill of their presence and the echo of their impossible request. The following morning, Cornelius announced his decision to the assembled former slaves. "I am dissolving Willow Creek Plantation entirely," he declared. "The land will be divided into parcels and offered first to those of you who wish to own the soil you've worked for generations. The main house—" He paused, his gaze drifting toward the mansion. "The main house will not stand much longer." 3 days later, after ensuring that all valuable items and historical documents had been removed, Cornelius Beaumont stood with Elijah and Sarah at a safe distance and watched as flames engulfed the grand white mansion that had dominated the landscape for nearly a century. The fire, officially attributed to a chimney fault, burned with unnatural intensity despite the damp November air. As the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, Sarah gasped softly and clutched Elijah's arm. Against the backdrop of the inferno, 2 small figures could be seen holding hands, their forms gradually dissolving into the smoke that rose toward the night sky. "Free," Sarah whispered. "Finally free." By Christmas of 1855, Willow Creek Plantation existed only in memory. The land had been parceled out among 37 former slaves, including Elijah and Sarah, who married in a simple ceremony on their new property. Cornelius returned to Philadelphia with the family records, which he would later donate to abolitionists as evidence of slavery's corrupting influence on both the enslaved and the enslavers. The Louisiana winter proved unusually harsh that year, with frost covering the fields where cotton had once grown under the overseer's lash. When spring arrived, those fields blossomed not with cotton, but with food crops. Corn, beans, potatoes, planted by free hands for free families. On a warm April afternoon, Elijah stood at the edge of his land, surveying the new community taking shape where Willow Creek had once stood. Small houses dotted the landscape, built by former slaves for their own families. A one-room schoolhouse was under construction near the crossroads, where children who would never know the lash would learn to read and write openly. "We had visitors this morning," Sarah said, approaching with a basket of fresh bread. Now visibly pregnant with their first child, she moved with a confidence that freedom had nurtured. Nathaniel and his family returning from New Orleans, he found Mama Hester. "How is she?" Elijah asked, taking his wife's free hand. Sarah smiled. "Thriving. She found her granddaughter working as a seamstress. They've opened a small shop together." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Nathaniel also brought news from the city. People are talking about Willow Creek, about what happened here." "What are they saying?" "That slaves rose up and took justice for themselves, that spirits of the wronged helped break their chains." Sarah's hand moved protectively over her swollen belly. "They're calling it the beginning. Proof that change is coming, that freedom can't be contained." Elijah looked out over the land that had absorbed so much suffering and was now nurturing new life. In the distance, near where the family cemetery had once stood, he thought he glimpsed two small figures watching, but when he blinked, they were gone. "Maybe it was," he said softly. "Maybe this was just the beginning." As the sun began to set over the former Willow Creek plantation, Elijah and Sarah walked hand in hand toward their modest home. Behind them, the wind whispered through new growth where the grand house had stood, carrying the faint echo of children's laughter, not mournful now, but joyous and free. From New Orleans to Boston, from Philadelphia to the farthest reaches of the abolition movement, the story of Willow Creek spread, sometimes as fact, sometimes as legend, but always as a powerful reminder that freedom was not merely a political concept, but a fundamental human right, worth fighting for, worth dying for, and in rare, extraordinary cases worth returning from beyond the grave to Kila aim. And in the decades that followed, as America descended into civil war and emerged into a new, imperfect freedom, the former slaves of Willow Creek and their descendants would tell their children about the ghostly twins who helped break their chains. Children consumed by the very system that sought to consume them all, whose vengeance became liberation, and whose restless spirits found peace only when justice was served. "Remember," the elders would say to wide-eyed children, "freedom isn't given. Sometimes it must be taken, and sometimes those who came before return to help show us the way." In the spring of 1865, as news of the war's end reached the community that had risen from Willow Creek's ashes, Elijah and Sarah's eldest child, a girl of 9, came running from the old cemetery path, breathless with excitement. "Papa, Mama," she called. "I saw them, the twins, they were smiling." Elijah exchanged a knowing glance with his wife. "What did they say, little one?" he asked gently. The child's face grew solemn beyond her years. "They said to tell everyone, the chains are broken, now build something new." And so they did, day by day, generation by generation, building a future on land once watered with tears, now nourishing the fruits of freedom that no one would ever consume but themselves.